Hi, I'm Hui, and I work at IPNO, Innocence Project New Orleans.
Hi, I'm Rajiv from Public DataWorks.
Hi, I'm Ayubi Rahim, and I work at IPNO.
Hi, I'm Sakari from Public DataWorks. We'd like to introduce you to the Louisiana Law Enforcement Accountability Database, LEAD, with 2 L's. LEAD is a public resource now available to everyone at LLEAD.co. This database contains information about every law enforcement officer in Louisiana, all sourced from public records.
We developed this database in partnership with Public Data Works, PDW, to make all public information about law enforcement in Louisiana easily accessible in one place. IPNO's mission is to free the innocent and those sentenced to unjust punishments. Since 2001, IPNO's work has led to the freedom or exoneration of 42 innocent people and 12 who were serving unjust sentences. We seek to use the lessons learned from our cases to advocate for policy changes and support our freed clients. In 2014, IPNO exonerated Reginald Adams, who served 34 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. His conviction was vacated after IPNO uncovered the misconduct of Detective Martin Venezia. Venezia framed Adams to protect the true perpetrator, a fellow officer and the victim's husband, who would later be convicted of killing his second wife under similar circumstances. Venezia surfaced as the lead detective in other troubling convictions. The police misconduct that led to the wrongful convictions of our clients is not unique to their cases. We have encountered repeated instances of misconduct and malfeasance in our cases and have worked to expose, case by case, the harms caused by these officers and how their agencies neglected to institute changes to prevent and correct such abuses. Auditing cases of officers with patterns of misconduct remains a goal, but systematically identifying these officers is impossible without comprehensive public law enforcement data. What if we could not only identify the known bad actors in a case, but also figure out who they worked and trained with? Could an officer's work history lead us to other cases in other jurisdictions? Are we missing whole classes of wrongful conviction cases because the systemic information has, until now, proven to be opaque? How many of the thousands who have written to IPNO have cases involving these officers or these departments? IPNO started exploring how to systematically collect publicly available law enforcement data in 2018. We soon learned that if LEAD was going to be both effective and useful, the data would need to be both broad, that is, spanning all agencies in the state, and deep, including as many data types and documents as possible. In order for LEAD to stay current, data collection would entail identifying all potential data sources and routinely collecting information from them. In 2020, we hired staff to start collecting and processing data at this massive scale. LEAD is the first statewide database of its kind. Every data point and every document is the product of a public records request. Those requests have been or will be made to every data source in every parish in Louisiana and updated as regularly as possible. This encompasses each police department or sheriff's office, but also includes municipal offices in each town, certifying bodies, and civil service entities. Orleans Parish alone has over 10 agencies to query. Each agency differs in its ability to report, so we receive this data in varying formats, scale, and scope. And that's just the first step. For more information about how the data gets processed, see the About page on lead.co or reach out to us with your questions.
Public DataWorks, or PDW, is an engineering and design studio that is focused on building tools that make data useful to the public. We started out embedded as a part of the Invisible Institute, a journalism production company on the south side of Chicago, with the primary mission to build investigative data tools that could be used to hold the Chicago Police Department accountable. In 2015, we launched cpdp.co, the Citizens Police Data Project.
Since its launch, CPDP has become a hub for community organizers, academic research, investigative journalism, and civil rights litigation. In fact, CPDP's data formed the initial basis for a Justice Department consent decree in Chicago. Now, together with IPNO, we are launching a statewide database of police data and documents. This tool includes information from more than 600 law enforcement agencies across Louisiana. This project is a significant expansion of the work that we began in Chicago, because we are now able to process and consolidate information from across multiple jurisdictions, meaning that an individual officer's profile can span across their career and beyond a single data source. We're also publishing the open source code base for LLEAD and the various tools used in our data processing pipeline.
Because public servants should be accountable to the communities they are sworn to serve, LLEAD seeks to increase transparency by enabling access to public law enforcement data and documents. More than just a repository of data, LLEAD is a tool that can improve public safety. We initially imagined LLEAD as a resource to help identify, investigate, and litigate cases of wrongful conviction, and to look for systemic patterns of misconduct in policing.
We soon found that this database could be useful for many others, including community members, law offices, law enforcement, press, and researchers. Our communities, from individuals to organizers, can now find information about who is policing their neighborhoods, research a case they're advocating for, maybe their own, or look up an officer's profile in real time. Law offices, practitioners, and investigators can use these data to aid in finding evidence, building cases, and creating and following new leads. Law enforcement can now review complete officer histories for potential hires and current staff. Agencies can also compare resources and trends, like staff size and migration, by city, by parish, and even internally. Press and researchers, with access to these aggregated public data, can use it to contribute to investigative journalism and academic research, and to inform impact studies or policy papers. All the underlying data and data processing techniques that power LLEAD are published on GitHub. We've made the entire project open source with the intention to be fully auditable and transparent, and to share our work as a model for projects in other jurisdictions.
Let's take a deeper look at LLEAD and show you what you might find. The first thing you'll see on the front page is a migratory map displaying individual career moves from one agency to another. LLEAD's data indicate that at least 500 officers have moved between over 200 law enforcement agencies across Louisiana. 87% of the officers in our database failed to report a reason for changing employers, despite the legal requirement to do so. Of those who did, the most commonly reported reason for changing employers is voluntary resignation, followed by resignation, termination, and involuntary resignation. The map tells you who moved between law enforcement agencies, along with when and why they moved. Trends in officer migration are shown in two ways. You'll see that the migration routes become thicker as the number of migrations grows, and the circles where officers land grow as well. As you scroll down the front page, you'll see rows previewing the types of data on LLEAD, with a row for departments or agencies, a row showcasing the individual officers that have the most complaints, a row showcasing news articles that were automatically pulling into LLEAD which mention individual officers, and a row of the documents that we're receiving in response to public records requests. Click on a card in any of these rows to see more information or the underlying documents. Anywhere you go on LLEAD, the search tool will be there. It is a simple but powerful tool that can help you find the info you're looking for. Simply start typing and search will display matches from LLEAD's database of departments or agencies, officers, news articles, and documents. Each law enforcement agency has its own page on LLEAD, where you'll see the location of the agency, how much information, and what kinds we have regarding the department. Scroll down to see featured officers, documents, and press. You can search within a particular department by clicking any of the search buttons within the rows on an agency page. At the bottom of each department page, you'll find datasets. These contain all the information we process to present on LLEAD. You can find the embedded tables to search and review the data directly on LLEAD. And if you're comfortable working with raw data, you can download the datasets directly. Be aware, and this applies to officer profiles as well. Our data may be limited to certain years because some departments are better able to provide historical data than others. To understand what limitations apply to the data displayed or downloaded, look for the data limitations text at the top of every department or officer page. LEAD uses the word officer to mean individuals employed by a law enforcement agency. We currently feature police agencies, including departments and sheriff offices. Each officer profile displays any general information we've received about the officer, such as biographical information and the agencies the officer has worked for. Scrolling down, you'll find the officer timeline, which displays an officer's history, including start and end dates, changes in rank or unit, allegations in which the officer was named, along with use of force incidents. Where available, the timeline also includes documents linked to the officer, such as appeal hearing transcripts and news articles in which they were named. You can copy a link to any particular card and save or share it. Clicking that link will take the user straight to the card of interest. If you're comfortable working with raw data, LEAD's download button will give you the officer's timeline in spreadsheet form. Back to the beginning. LEAD's front page, with a few clicks, lets you know how many departments, officers, documents, and news articles you can search. This number will continue to grow as we receive and process information for an ever-growing number of sources. We aim to collect data from every law enforcement agency in the state. You can also navigate to lead.co on your phone, accessing all the same data and features available on desktop.
IPNO and PDW are collaborating with the Human Rights Data Analysis Group, HRDAG, to process and analyze the vast number of documents that do not come to us as structured data. We are using machine learning to extract the most relevant information from these documents so that we can display it on LEAD and perform analyses, expanding our database with information that would otherwise be lost in PDF documents. This information will allow us to identify new trends, themes, and timelines. In the future, LEAD will also feature data from other types of law enforcement agencies, like district attorneys' offices and police laboratories. Like the police, increasing the transparency of these agencies can also help to improve accountability. Technically, all these data and documents are already public information, but the process of gaining access to them and connecting it all together was not easy. Each dataset or document was requested separately from each police agency in each parish, and they were all produced in different formats. Until now, all of this valuable information was buried in filing cabinets or dusty internal hard drives. On LEAD, for the first time ever, all this information from across the state of Louisiana is gathered together in one place.
We spoke to many people while developing the project. They all spoke of the need for something like this database and envisioned potential uses that we hadn't imagined. We will continue to develop this resource, knowing that its success means much more than how it might help IPNO. LEAD is an open source database, built with the intention of serving as a model for other organizations, legal offices, and academic institutions. We're excited to learn how others use LEAD in their work to increase law enforcement accountability in Louisiana. We invite you to explore LEAD at lead.co. Thank you.
Hello.
You guys are good to go. The audience can see and hear you, so feel free to start say hello whenever.
Hi, everybody. I thought I'd start with a question for Rajiv. If you could speak to us about the evolution from CPDP to LEAD. Obviously, IPNO was very inspired by CPDP in the first place while trying to figure out what to do and how to get all of this information and put it together. And the second part of the question is if you have been surprised or particularly encouraged by any particular forms of users or what that data has been used for that you maybe didn't imagine when you first started it.
Certainly. Thanks so much for that great question. I'll start off by saying that for us as PW, the challenge of going from CPDP, which is a very detailed database about a single police department, and transitioning to the much broader challenge of figuring out how to bring in data from all these different sources that came to us in different formats and normalize it and turn it into a resource that makes all those things available in one place was a huge, it had been something that we've been working towards for a long time. We, from the beginning, had a really strong emphasis on Chicago and the Chicago Police Department with CPD and CPDP. And we knew that that wasn't the full picture. And being able to work together with you all, especially the extraordinary data gathering and data processing work that Ayub has led, made it possible for us to take on this challenge of building a statewide database that brings in data from all these different police departments and agencies into one place. So for us, that was a really exciting opportunity. Definitely at the very, very beginning of CPDP, we started off doing things that were really only possible with a very detailed, rich data set about a single police department, like very, very advanced visualizations and interactive tools that let you make a lot of interesting graphs and explore maps in a lot of detail and look at network analysis. But quickly after we launched CPDP, we found out that the tools that are most exciting to people actually were being able to look up an officer's profile and just being able to look at all the information and documents that are available associated with that document, with that particular officer. So for us, when we started working on LLEAD with IPNO, our primary focus was serving that immediate goal, which was, as a researcher, as an investigator, as an organizer, as an attorney, I just want to get the information about this officer as quickly and efficiently as possible and be confident that this is a reliable source and a comprehensive source, or as close to it as possible. So we put a lot more emphasis on officer profiles and a really flexible model for how we handle different types of information and documents that can fit onto an officer profile. So I think that in terms of moving from CPDP to LLEAD, a lot of our emphasis was on versatility and flexibility and being able to ingest and handle and merge together all this information from a wide variety of sources. And that was a really exciting challenge for us. And it really, I think, came to fruition, but there's definitely a lot of work still ahead of us. And I feel like when it comes to some of the more interesting, or some of the things that really stood out to us from how people use CPDP and some of our hopes for how people will use LLEAD, definitely across the spectrum, from community organizers to people like pulling up the data on their phone in the middle of a real life encounter, at a protest, in front of an officer, and being able to actually have information in their hands that changes the dynamics of power and accountability in that moment is, I think, a really powerful thing, and something that's always been really inspiring to us whenever we've seen that happen. In addition to that, seeing public defenders use data about an officer to validate their client's experience and to support them and to protect them in court, of course, is an incredibly important use case for our data, and one that we put a lot of energy in Chicago into developing a relationship with Cook County Public Defender's Office in order to make sure that they knew how to access our data and it was brought into their use case, into their workflows as quickly and easily as possible. And then academic research and journalists use CPDP on a regular basis, and we have the hope that in Louisiana, across Louisiana, LLEAD will become a tool that attorneys and investigators and academic researchers find out about and make use of in a regular way. And I think those are the two questions you were asking.
Okay.
Thanks. Cool.
I'll start with, I guess, the easiest question to answer, which is, will district attorney offices be included in LLEAD? The short answer is yes. We still have to figure out how. But then that leads me to the next question, which Ayub, I hope you can speak to, regarding, I guess, what challenges you faced in even collecting the information, and what steps you took to overcome those challenges. And I think this will also speak to anybody else who's thinking about doing such a thing, identify some challenges you should expect to face.
Sure. Very generally, you should expect to not get a response to your public records request. But there's also one very general solution that I found works, and that's looking for an alternative agency that's housing these records. It's very rare that only one agency has this public record in their hands. And so what I've done is basically look for alternative agencies that would have said disciplinary report. It could be the city attorney's office might have such a report. The payroll department might have a report because some officers, if they're suspended, they lose, say, pay for a week or so, and that's noted at the payroll office. You can reach out to the Civil Service Commission, which hears disciplinary appeal hearings, and very often they'll have the original report of relating to the misconduct that the officer is adjudicating. So very generally, yes, expect to face some resistance when submitting a public records request, but know that these records very often exist in other places outside of the police department, and some of those records custodians are much more open to giving data.
And this is true, I think, also, especially in municipalities or places that aren't particularly well resourced. Sometimes we find that police departments can't actually give us the data that we maybe think they should have or should have kept. A, because it's no one's job there to do it, but B, because they just might not be able to do it. Which is why seeking out alternative sources, as Ayub was saying, is a very important part of the process. So as I think we said in the presentation, it's not just the departments and sheriff's offices that we are asking for data. It's every potential data source. There have been several questions now about resistance to either our requests or our ability to obtain the information that goes into LEAD. I guess dovetailing with the point before, all of this data that we are seeking is actually already public record. So it's not, or it shouldn't be, I don't think, some sort of politicized process. It's just the challenge of being able to or being willing to comply with what's already on the books as a public records law about public records that are already public. And so we try to move through those challenges, both by actually talking with the agencies that we are requesting information from. That's mostly Ayub doing follow-ups or finding different ways to ask the same question to get to that data. And so it varies. And we've queried over 600 law enforcement agencies or potential data sources already, and so that answer will change depending on which agency you're talking about. I hope that answers the question. So the next question is about whether or not LEAD has resulted in lower officer misconduct. Since it's been live for technically a couple hours, that would be an impossible question to answer. It's certainly a hope that increasing transparency also increases accountability. And if that does lead to lower misconduct rates, that would be amazing. Ayub, Rajiv, are you seeing that last question about officers being removed from LEAD?
At this time, our approach on LEAD has been to accurately represent the data that were provided in response to our requests. And I can't imagine a scenario where an officer's data that had been provided to us from a official source would have to have that information removed. I think that if the question here is referring to like a personal request from an officer saying that they just don't want their information online, then I think that that's like a really more of a legal question of whether or not this is public information and whether or not there are any like specific protections for information about an individual in the context where they're performing a function as a civil servant. So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, the answer is no. Officers don't get removed. I can imagine if there's erroneous information that's been provided to us in response to a public records request, and we're able to correct the errors with a new updated public records request, then in that scenario, we can imagine updating it with the more up-to-date, corrected information. But I think that's a pretty exceptional circumstance. Ayub, does that match up with your thinking as well?
Yeah, perfectly.
I could try to field this question. The question being about what it took to create LEAD in the first place. We started asking the question seriously in 2018. By seriously, I mean, we had already spoken to many people in the community about the need for such a database. They all had different envisioned uses for it, but the fact was it didn't exist. There are a lot of people who were keeping their own lists, but it was nobody's job to figure out how to collect and process this information, much less do it. And so what it took initially and remains to be true was that we needed to hire someone like Ayub to take a look at this, figure out what we already knew about how to collect data, what sources to collect data from. But it was his job not only to start that process, but design the system so that it would be a systematic way to collect this data, a systematic way to process this data, and bringing in Public Data Works, who already had experiences with how to design that pipeline so that you can get from that initial public records request to actually what you're seeing on lead.co. Really what it took was a commitment of resources, and they're not insubstantial. I guess what I'd really emphasize, though, is that it needed to be somebody's job to figure out how to do it. Otherwise, it was going to remain, as it did for decades, just a wish list. So the need was already out there. It took making it somebody's job to figure out how to answer that need, to really get it started and to really get to where we are today.
Do you want to take this next question?
I can start.
Okay.
I hope y'all will help me finish. The question being about the envisioned uses for the community. I think it's important that you know that LEAD is designed not really with any specific uses in mind. That is, we didn't want to tell people, okay, here's the data and this is how you should use it. I'm sure there are many uses that we haven't already envisioned. Internally, it was developed as a way to hopefully, from big data, be able to identify trends and themes and officers that have to do with IPNO cases or potential IPNO cases. But there's no reason we thought that this information would not be useful to all those other people I mentioned before who we talked to about why this would be necessary. In a more abstract way, we don't know if the public access to this information, what it's going to result in. But certainly, as far as the public dialogue about policing, which seems to go in large circles in our society, you're talking about defund the police, refund the police. A lot of these conversations, and sometimes in very important places where like policy is being set, these conversations are being had in a vacuum, right? So how will it change these conversations and potentially these policies, or even the way the communities interact with the people who are policing them, if there's actually data behind it? If it's not just if it's not just, screaming partisan things at other partisans. What if you go in armed with, okay, this is the need for our community. These are the numbers that, show that need. And maybe people can interact differently about the conversation itself, instead of being in an echo chamber or in a vacuum.
I think that sums it up really nicely. Yeah, I would just emphasize that there's a really wide range of use cases, and some are at a really micro level where you're looking at a specific case, an individual officer, and then other are along that spectrum at a much wider scale where you're looking at entire departments or comparing departments or looking at patterns over time. And we think that there's a lot of potential in all those use cases. And we've tried to make it as simple as possible to be able to serve both those needs in terms of making all the raw data available in tabular form, so it's really easy to work with for analysts, and making officer profiles with a variety of different types of event cards, all easily viewable on mobile phones as well as on normal desktop browsers for an officer profile and for a department page as well. I'd say in terms of future goals, I would first emphasize that we're hoping to spend a lot more time going forward now that's available to the public, doing outreach and bringing this tool to people's attention and putting it into their hands. I don't think at this point we have a firm answer on specifically like the technical tasks of accessibility and different languages and being more disability friendly. But those are, of course, really important priorities that we don't want to be dismissive of. Well, before we close out, I just wanted to mention, I suppose, one specific use case that maybe contradicts Wee's statement about there having been no specific use cases in mind. We did, in the last few months of working on LEAD, start to discover really interesting trends of officers who've migrated from one department to another. And that inspired us to build the map that we put on the front page, which, in a lot of ways is a pretty specific analysis. It shows officers who've resigned or been asked to resign or been terminated from a department and then moved to another department and gotten a job somewhere else as a police officer. And that's a pattern that I'm sure most participants on this call are familiar with in their own contexts. And it's one that's been observed around the country in a lot of different ways, but we hadn't seen it illustrated before. And that's one of the reasons why we started, after Ayub had dug up the data, all the data about this, we started to really spend a bit more time thinking about how to illustrate that concept. And that's led us to a map on our front page that shows over time all the different officer migrations that we were able to track from data across the state, moving from one department to another after being terminated or resigning.
I guess let me try to save myself from that last statement. It's not that we didn't imagine any uses. What I meant to say is that we did not want to limit any uses by telling people that, oh, here's the data and this is how you should use it. We certainly had our own envisioned use for this database. That's why it was developed in the first place. But I am very excited to see how different people might use this data and this resource in their own advocacy, in their own work, and how it might get us a little further down the road as far as police accountability and transparency. And who knows? I don't want to put any limits on how people use this data as long as they use it responsibly. So, and then the last question. Ayub, you want to speak to how LEAD gets updated?
Sure. Well, so the process of submitting public records requests, following up with custodians, and actually getting the request or getting the records that you've requested from the agency in question. That's a manual process and will continue to be a manual process, at least when dealing with over 600 agencies, as we said. As far as the data processing, once you've built the infrastructure, which we've pretty much done for Louisiana, it's near automatic, the processing of the data that is. So it's a mix of both manual labor and near automation in some of the processing that we do.
And I guess I'll leave you with thanks for your engagement, thanks for your questions, and let us know what you can do with LLEAD.
Thanks so much, everyone. And please visit LLEAD at LLEAD.co. And if you have any thoughts or questions, there's a contact button on the website you can use to send a message to all of us.
Thanks, everyone.